Welcome to Microsoft SaaS Stories. I'm your host, Jason Young, a curious engineering manager here at Microsoft. And in this episode with Cybus, we'll learn how AI can empower users in unexpected ways. Today I'm here with Jasmin Skenderi, CTO of Cybus. How's it going?
Hey Jason, thank you so much for having me here. Great here. It's a bit dark and cold here in Germany, but
Okay.
I'm having some tea to make me warm throughout this call. So
Okay, well that's good. That's good. Yeah, and it's definitely I know it's later in the day there. Here it's overcast.
mhm.
But you know, we'll get through winter.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, let's just dive right into it. So, tell me a little bit about your company and what products you have and like what do they focus on?
Yeah, thank you so much. So what we actually do, we introduce digitalization to factories. That's kind of on the really on bird's view on it. But
Hmm.
if we go a bit deeper, what does it mean? It actually means that we provide data infrastructures inside of the factories. So we call
Okay.
it kind of factory data hub. And if you look a bit deeper into that, you see something a bit more special, which is kind of around connecting machines to the services, IT services inside of the factories and also outside the factories. So we are running kind of on premises, however, with cloud native technologies. So it means you can easily run Cybus Connectware inside of a cloud and provide value to the customers. So this is kind of the overview of the things that we do.
Okay. So I know in manufacturing there's just a wealth of data being generated inside of factories. Like you could read from a sensor every millisecond, or even more finely grained than that, and you can come up with an infinite amount of data coming off of various machines that are doing things. So it seems like there's a massive opportunity there. So you were
A
talking
huge
about,
one.
yeah, exactly. And you were talking about on-prem, you have all of this data, and then you were talking about using cloud native technologies locally, which is great because I know that speed and efficiency can be super important. But then
Mm.
you mentioned that the cloud is in there as well. So is the cloud portion, is that doing orchestration of all these different factories and how all of the data flows work? Is that the idea?
One part of the idea
Mm-hmm.
is definitely that one, where you are able to orchestrate. You normally don't only have and bigger enterprise customers that we are focusing on. You don't normally have just one factory. You have several factories, like both of us across the continents, across the globe, and you want to orchestrate them. You want to synchronize them, and this is how you do it normally. So that's one part of it. The second part of it, you already have services running in the cloud. You maybe save some data. You maybe do have some applications running in the cloud that need the data. You want to apply artificial intelligence to the data that is coming from the factories. So in order to do that, you need a data layer that basically connects to the factory and sends the data towards the cloud. So that's the second part of the story.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, that sort of lays the foundation then for everything else that we're talking about. So, what first motivated you then to consider a SaaS model?
Mm. So I think for the SaaS model, we are a very crucial part if we talk about this particular area of the industry and factories moving towards less traditional software that is normally known as software running on premises towards something more modern, more performant towards cloud. And in order to do that, you need an interconnector that runs either on premises or in the cloud. And this piece, this missing part, this missing piece is connectware.
Mhm.
And so what moves us towards SaaS is basically seeing how the future is going to develop into the factories, and we see how the thoughts are being developed in the industrial world, where we are moving from the traditional software running on premises towards the cloud, towards the software as a service, or the software as a service um, idea in general behind it.
Yeah, manufacturing is an interesting space because in other industries, I've seen a push toward a SaaS model but oftentimes that means that they are running on-prem and they want to change that. So they might have some customers that are still on-prem and they might have some that are in the cloud, but it's sort of an either or. I think manufacturing is particularly interesting because at the end of the day, you have machines that are running locally. The machines can't move into the cloud. Like it just doesn't work that way. So I think that the manufacturing industry has very interesting constraints where they have to live in that dual world. You have to take advantage of the benefits of both. You have to connect both. You have to make it manageable. And then you throw in all of these crazy constraints where, you have data security, you have data residency, you have all these other layers on top of it. So you're, navigating a very complex space. I'm just sort of realizing now, like how much more complicated it is than some other industries.
You just found the holy grail of that, and that's why actually we are focusing on that particular part that you describe it very well. Mm-hmm. So the industry has to move towards cloud, but it can in its whole. So the magic word here is latency. You just can't, as you said, move machines into the cloud. You also cannot move the controlling software completely into the cloud. Mm-hmm. So what you need in a factory is a real-time response. And this is in the industrial world very, very well defined, and the latencies are so short that you are unable to move everything to the cloud. However, you have to move parts of it into the cloud, and for that you exactly need that software placed in the middle.
Okay. So then I'm really curious, like, we talk about SaaS all the time, but like in your world, then what does SaaS mean to you? Like, how do you think about SaaS?
It basically, what we all know, it is a software that's provided as a service to the customers. And there is not only one flavor of that. So it doesn't necessarily only means here's the software, you can log into your account online and then you use the software and that's it. In a very simple, maybe smaller application world, yes, that's the case. However, in this more complex world, it means that you have to have kind of a hybrid solution of the classical software as a service and the software that has also some other licensing models. Yeah? Mm-hmm. However, at its very core, still provided to the customers as a service. So it's a kind of a hybrid thought that I'm bringing in today that we are following.
Yeah, I love that. So walk me through how you actually leverage the Microsoft stack then, like what Microsoft products you use and how did that enable you to build this hybrid solution?
Yeah, totally. So we have kind of two streams in the collaboration with Microsoft. So the one stream goes through this industrial thread, and where we talk about that and work on that, how to provide the solutions to the customers that we just talked about. That's the one part. And the second part is maybe more attractive to the current news that we hear out there about artificial intelligence. Yeah, the artificial intelligence, how do we use and leverage the power of artificial intelligence for the industrial applications? So we are working basically on those two streams. And if we talk in particular about the industrial stream, about the industrial work where we are together, there are a few parts that I'd like to name, like Azure Arc control plane, where we are basically having something controlling, deploying, connectware on premises, also the services, and being able to connect to the services inside of the factory through the Microsoft technology stack. That's the one part. The other thing is we're probably going to talk a bit about that, how the software that we've built is working. But one part of it is that we are scaling very well if we are running in a Kubernetes cluster. And so this is another part of the cooperation where we are using Microsoft's AKS, Azure Kubernetes services. So that's the one part of the story that we use. And the second one is the artificial intelligence. How do we use OpenAI in order to enhance the experience of users using our software? And this is where we work together on providing those values, on how to use the software itself, but also how to configure the software, how to let it run. At the moment, you have to write a so-called commissioning files. It means you write down the configuration, basically something like this machine with that protocol and this IP address, please connect to the following service on that IP address, something like that. In the future, what you would be able to do is you're going to be able to say, hey, Copilot, can you please connect this machine with that protocol to that service? That's it. More than that. And this is a brilliant thing. That's something that excites all of us, not only the Cybus people, but also our customers. So those are two streams.
Yeah, I was poking around on your website and I saw the YAML-based configuration for some of this. And I didn't even think about that. Like I've been doing that so much recently using GitHub Copilot. But you're right. If you have your model configured to work with your particular YAML structure, that is incredibly powerful. Or even asking it then, like, let's say that I want to manually edit it and something isn't working. Like I can just say, hey, this isn't working. Here's the error I'm getting. What does this mean? Like that's so powerful. That person is so empowered.
Totally, you share our excitement. I'm really happy to hear that you went a bit through those YAML files. We are really excited, even today, after so many tests and preparing Copilot, that we can just tell it, here's a protocol that we never told you how it works, but you know it from the internet. Write me a commissioning file for that in YAML and connect these machines with following endpoints and send it somewhere. Yeah. And it does. This is really a magic happening. That's amazing.
Yeah, I've been doing that a lot recently with like FFmpeg locally, right? So I have security cameras that are they're using the streaming protocol, and I just tell Copilot, I say, hey, I want to access this camera using this protocol, and write me the FFmpeg line, and it's like bloop 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 bloop, and then I can sit there and I can be like, actually, I don't want you to change the encoding, or I don't want you to do this. It's a fantastic experience, and I can also say explain every parameter to me, like explain exactly what all of this means, and that part I find incredibly valuable.
That's also like huge value is exactly what you said. Like explain to me why are you writing the commissioning file this way you are doing it. Yeah. So I'd use word crazy. That's really amazing.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of AI being applied to this type of configuration. Because whenever you first approach a product, I mean, people don't want to open the manual. They want to start poking around at things and they're not quite sure, what does what. This is a fantastic way to basically have an expert, but the expert just happens to be an AI, and you come in and you're like, listen, here's what I'm trying to do. And then they're that translator into what actually needs to get done. What a fantastic use of AI.
Yeah. I just wanted maybe to add one point there. Sure. We were kind of lucky. We were lucky that we made decisions back in the time to build software this way. We've built it in such a way that you always had to use configuration files, this YAML files, in order to do that. So no code, click around the software and configure the machine. But we focus really on writing this commissioning. And this is I probably say just we were lucky to do that, because now it's so easy for machines to read those files. So we made a few really good decisions. it's just amazing how quickly the model can be trained to understand a written file that a machine can read. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What a fantastic insight, though, because you're right. I was just thinking about that same thing where if it was a UI that you had to do inputs into, and then that was just direct, right? Like that just went straight to code, that integrating AI with that could be incredibly difficult. But by having it so that you have this configuration file, it's sort of a middle point at which the AI is able to, you're able to speak a language that it's fairly easy for it to understand. That's amazing.
Totally. It's now able to read our whole, not only software, but the whole configuration and everything. And
Yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So this would be a good tip for anybody who is maybe not ready to, or they just want to set themselves up to embrace AI later. Think about those points at which you could later inject AI, but for today, it could be an intermediate like configuration file. So basically, instead of having an AI entry point, you have this like configuration entry point. I really like that. That's a good tip for people.
Totally.
Yeah. So totally shifting gears here. So what does the pricing model look like for this?
Yeah. So at the moment, and we know the industry is changing and we are moving and we are learning also with the customers, how the customers use our software. We also know what's the direction of moving software towards the cloud. We also know that. But at the moment, this is how it looks like. You basically have a yearly license subscription where you can subscribe to the software for a year. And then we, of course, with customers, we talk to them and create a specific contracts with customers, but it kind of moves around that. Yeah.
Okay. So you just keep it extremely flexible and based on the situation with the customer. Okay.
Totally.
That's fair enough. And then as you were building this, and as you were, starting to integrate the cloud, what were some of the biggest challenges that you ran into? And I'm curious if they were mostly business, mostly technical, if it was a mixture.
Both of them, everyone who have built products and special technical products knows how difficult it is to move from something that works to something that reliably works, from something that's running at customers to something that has high quality, high availability, and runs in every situation. And so a lot of challenges here from the technical perspective, but also, as you said, from the business perspective, we often have to educate our customers to explain the value, why it is important to know what's happening in your factory. Can be, for a lot of people, can be something where you say, okay, it's obvious. However, you still have to explain this. You still have to explain how big the value is, and you have to explain the return on investment and similar stuff. But from the technical perspective, this is where I'm coming from. So this is kind of my view on that. How do you build a reliable software in this particular case is you install the software at customers and you solve problems. And you do this for a lot of years until you really have a product that is capable of running in production critical environments, which we are at that moment today. However, a lot of learning in between, where we had a lot of sleepless nights, where we had a lot of moments where we thought, how is this going to be solved? Yeah. Luckily, at the end, you do find a solution. But going through that hell of thinking how this is going to be solved is one part of that, how you create a reliable software. And you have to go through that. You have to go through that.
Right. Yeah. And you have, you're 1 foot in the on-prem world and then you have 1 foot in the cloud SaaS world. So like, what were the challenges then of like the SaaS side of things, running a 24/7 service that ends up connecting these factories that, really never sleep, right? I know that there's some factories where they say, hey, if we're down for an hour, that's 1,000,000 pounds of ice cream that's going to melt, or that's, $10 million worth of cars that aren't being shipped or whatever.
The magnitude is huge. Like we are a lot of our customers coming from automotive area, and every not a minute, every second where the production stands is a huge amount of dollars that go away. So also here, because you asked about the challenges, one of the challenges is to create contracts that are going to cover that downtime as well, if it happens. But the challenges in the cloud, as you said, in the premise, on-prem, are kind of similar in terms of the availability. So there are no excuses there and saying, oh, this software is running in the cloud, and so that's why we have problems and the synchronization doesn't work. Customer is not really interested in that. So these stories is not really what really matters is, do you have your production running, how it goes? And the challenges there often are around the synchronization. The time passes by from the data point leaves the factory and data point gets into a cloud. You do something with that and comes back, can be significantly different than you would have it on-prem. So, and this synchronization is something that you really have to think of. How do you overcome the problems? The biggest problems are always around software runs well and runs for 3 weeks, for 3 months. It runs well for 3 years. And then comes a day where nothing works anymore. Things stop. Services go wild. You don't know what's going on. Something happened, but you don't know what. And you still have to cope and deal with that.
Right. So it sounds like they were primarily technical challenges, just based on all of the pieces that are sort of out of your control that you have to work with. It's interesting.
Yeah. From my perspective, indeed, as I said, it's not only technical. There are also business challenges from the other side.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then thinking back, is there anything that you wish you had done differently as you were, going through this journey to SaaS?
Well, frankly speaking, you always think, I could have done it better, or we could have made some better decisions in here. Those are often of technical, from the field of technical issues. You often think, oh, maybe we should have designed this a bit differently, or maybe the architecture should be changed a bit. Because only after a year or two of usage, you sometimes see why something is not running at its optimum, and you have to change something. So you always think, okay, maybe if we would go for technology A or technology B, it would be a lot better. So frankly speaking, you're faced with that question every day.
Yeah.
But it's not only about making the perfect decision. It is about indeed making decisions. That's often what I see in the world of technology, that people are testing and thinking and finding for the best solution, and then they realize that they are too slow. So I'd rather go for a limited, well-defined time slot where you analyze technologies, but then you have to make a decision, and you have to deal with that you sometimes do not make the best decision. Yeah.
Right. So don't delay a decision. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree with that. And then as you were building the SaaS piece of this, the hybrid piece, like how did you get the engineers thinking about SaaS, especially if they were, you're building the on-prem piece and you are, building this Kubernetes cluster, and now all of a sudden you're building this other piece, which has to be, I know it has to have like the same kind of availability, but it needs to have, let's say redundancy across zones or across regions. and it has to have all of these, connectivity to these different places. Like, how did you just get your engineers to really start thinking in SaaS?
It's a really good question. I asked that question as well. So how I mean, I am coming from a kind of cloud work, so previously working on these topics and products that live in the cloud. But moving to now and working for Cybus is kind of a mind shift where you have to understand that you have to deal with both worlds, and it's at least people do ask a lot of questions, yeah. But there is a part of it that helps us a lot, that the technologies that we use are actually cloud native technologies, yeah. So if we talk about motivating people to start working for us, we do explain on that how the software is being built, and actually it's not really different. It's just at the beginning sounds kind of different, but if you look exactly at the technologies that we use, if you say in a container, and you say Docker, and you say Kubernetes, and you say microservices, that's something where engineers do easily identify themselves with.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how did you build this then for scale? Obviously you have to scale up the cloud piece for all of the data that you're working with and the AI capabilities. So how did you think about that?
So if it's different types of scaling, yeah. But if we talk about how software scales, yeah, so what helps us a lot is how the software is being built and how the architecture works. So it means that we normally do run in a Kubernetes cluster. And this Kubernetes cluster does, according to the configuration, helps us to scale up and down the software so that we can reply to the requests towards the software. And you also talked about millions and millions of messages that are coming from the factory. You also have to be capable of scaling up and down in order to save the cost. So this is how we do it. Basically running in a Kubernetes cluster, letting Kubernetes doing the work for us on scaling the software up and down. Our task is basically to build the software in such a way that it can horizontally scale. Yeah.
Okay. So you invested in elasticity and horizontal scale, and then you let Kubernetes handle that. Okay, that's great. And then what about the security side of things? How do you think about security?
Yeah, that's another part that kind of at the very beginning surprised me a bit, that the security level in factories was not that high. And this has also very good reasons, yeah, in some of the cases. However, now the factories do more and more think about security, the cybersecurity. They understand the importance of it. And of course, if we talk about communication between the sites, between the factories, then you are exposed to the, say, outer world, and you're exposed to the attacks, the potential attacks. So you have to think about security. So what we have is, and also the way how we have built the software is with the modern technologies that we all know on the transport layer security, so known as TLS and MTLS. We have a provision in user management, where you can not only say which users, but also which machines are allowed to do things and access the data. And also then very granularly, you're able to say, in that particular machine, you can access only these values. So this way of how we deal with data is already significantly improving the security that we have. Okay. Also, the things like multi-factor authentication, like LDAP and similar technologies, cutting edge, I dare to say, technologies that we use at Connectware are significantly improving also industrial security. Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. And then when you first went into production, were there any big surprises that, where the reality sort of hit you?
I kind of talked about that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it does happen. The reality is that customers do expect a software that is always available at the highest performance, with the highest quality, and very reliable. However, this reliability is something that you develop over time. It's not at the very beginning of the product introduction. So, and during that time where we have introduced the product as the company, we did have a lot of issues indeed, that we had to solve. And the messages do get lost. The service was available for days and months is not available. Out of the sudden, it doesn't work anymore. The configurations stop doing what they did, and these kind of things that you just discover only if you are really installed and really running at customers. And in our test, software previously was always passing all the tests. You would go through QA and it would always work, but the reality of customer using the software is really the environment where the software gets stronger. And yes, we did have issues. That's absolutely true.
The complexities of reality.
Totally.
Yeah. And then, are you available in the Azure Marketplace?
At the moment, we're not.
Okay.
Now, as software. The reason being that the software that we use as infrastructure in factories is a bit more complex to be just available on the marketplace and be just selected and downloaded. It needs a bit of configuration. It needs a cluster to be configured and similar stuff. It is a industrial professional software that you use for production critical applications. So at the moment, not. However, we did have thoughts, and we are working also with Microsoft about that, maybe about the modules or the software itself for the specific configuration to be available.
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion. Let's figure out how to make that happen.
Exactly.
Limitations, they only have to be temporary. We can always overcome any of those limitations.
Totally.
Very cool. Anything else that you wanted to mention that I didn't ask about?
Nothing special. Just maybe to mention that not only that we believe in digitalization and the power of the software and the modern technologies being introduced into the factories. Maybe this is the message also to the listener of our conversation, to not to be afraid of digitalization, that there are software solutions out there that can be used and that have passed years and years of testing and that are reliable enough to start now working with.
Yeah, absolutely. The time is now, right? Like the technology has gotten so mature, and we still have plenty of really interesting ways to augment that, especially, we were talking about the AI angle. I mean, the power there. So I love that you were sort of set up to really take advantage of that. Not, in your architecture, having a cloud orchestration layer, but then also having your configuration files. Like, these are things to think about for setting yourself up for, success in future technology. So it sounds like you're in a great place.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Jasmin, for coming on here and talking to us about Cybus and the architecture and all of the different pieces. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and have a great evening.